The day began like any other for Sundar Pichai. The soft morning light streamed through the glass walls of his office at Google headquarters, casting warm shadows on the floor. Outside, the campus was already buzzing with life. Engineers walking quickly with laptops tucked under their arms, the faint sound of laughter drifting in from the courtyard, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. Sundar's schedule was packed as always. Meetings about new products, investor, calls, and a press briefing later in the afternoon. But he didn't know that before the day ended, one unexpected encounter would change not only his thoughts, but also his heart in a way he hadn't felt in years. It started just after lunch. Sundar had stepped out to take a short walk, a habit he had developed to clear his mind between intense meetings. He was passing the small public park across the street from the campus when he noticed a little girl sitting alone on a wooden bench. She looked to be no more than 8 or 9, wearing a faded pink dress with frayed edges. Her feet dangled off the bench, swinging back and forth. She wasn't playing with a phone or reading a book like most kids he saw these days. Instead, she was staring at the sky with an expression that was both curious and sad, as if she were searching for something far away. Normally, Sundar wouldn't intrude. He valued privacy, his own and others. But something about the way the girl's eyes glistened in the sunlight made him slow down. He noticed her lips moving slightly, whispering words he couldn't quite hear. "Hi there," he said gently. As he approached, "Are you waiting for someone?" The girl looked at him, startled at first, but then she gave a small smile. "No, I'm just thinking about what?" he asked, sitting down the other end of the bench. Careful. To keep a respectful distance, her hands twisted together in her lap. "About God." The answer caught him off guard. Sundar had been asked countless questions in his life about technology, leadership, innovation, but this was different. "God?" he repeated softly. She nodded, her small voice trembling. "Slightly. Do you think he's real?" The simplicity of the question carried a weight Sundar didn't expect. In an instant, he felt a rush of memories, his childhood in India, the evenings spent listening to his mother tell stories from the Bhagavad Gita, the times he prayed silently during moments of uncertainty. But now, faced with this innocent face, he realized he didn't have an easy answer. "Why do you ask?" he said, wanting to understand before answering. The girl hesitated, her eyes dropping to the ground. "Because my mom says he's always watching over us. But if that's true, why did he let my dad get sick? Why didn't he stop it?" Her voice cracked on the last word, and Sundar noticed how tightly she gripped the hem of her dress. For a moment, Sundar's heart ached in silence. Here was a child carrying a question that even adults struggled to answer. He felt the urge to comfort her, to give her something to hold on to. But he also knew words could feel hollow if they weren't. "True." He took a deep breath. "Sometimes," he began slowly, "it's not about God stopping bad things from happening, but about how we find strength when they do. Maybe God works through the people around us, through kindness, through moments when we help each other." She looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "But what if no one helps?" Her question cut deep. Sundar thought about the countless people in the world who suffered quietly, unnoticed. He thought about the times he had been too busy, too distracted to reach out. Just then, a woman's voice called out sharply from across the park. "Mia!" The girl flinched and quickly wiped her eyes. Sundar turned to see a tired-looking woman. Approaching, her steps hurried, her face tense. "I told you not to wander off." The woman scolded, grabbing the girl's hand. She didn't even glance at Sundar. The girl looked back at him for a moment, her eyes silently asking something he couldn't yet name. Then she was pulled away, leaving him sitting alone on the bench with the sound of her questions still echoing in his mind. He sat there for a long moment, staring at the path where she had disappeared, wondering why her words had shaken him so deeply. But as he stood to leave, he spotted something small on the bench where she had been sitting, a folded piece of paper with faint pencil marks on. He picked it up, unfolded it carefully, and saw a drawing. It was a simple sketch of a little girl holding hands with a man. Above them, in uneven letters, were the words, "God, please don't forget us." Sundar felt his chest tighten. He slipped the paper into his pocket, knowing he couldn't just walk away from this. What he didn't know yet was that this small drawing would pull him into a journey far bigger than he could have imagined. One that would test his beliefs, challenge his heart, and connect him to people he never thought he'd meet. And it would all begin with finding that little girl again. Sundar returned to his office that afternoon. But the usual rhythm of his day felt broken. The hum of computers, the chatter of his team, the steady stream of emails, none of it seemed to reach him. His mind kept drifting back to the park bench, to the little girl named Mia, and to the folded paper now resting in the inner pocket of his jacket. Every time he thought of her small, trembling voice asking if God was real, a strange heaviness settled in his chest. He pulled the paper out again and unfolded it on his desk. The drawing was so simple, yet it carried more emotion than anything he had seen in a long time. The lines were uneven, the proportions slightly off, but the expression on the faces, the little girl and the man, radiated both hope and sadness. The words above them seemed to burn into his mind. God, please don't forget us. He found himself wondering about her life. Who was her father? How sick was he? What was her home like? Did she have enough to eat? And why did her mother look so worn, as if every ounce of energy was being spent on just making it through the day? Sundar realized these were questions he wouldn't normally ask about strangers, but something about this girl had cut through the walls. He had built to keep his emotions in check in a world that moved too fast. He was still staring at the paper when his assistant knocked on the door and stepped in. "Sir, the investors are ready on the conference call. Give me 5 minutes." Sundar replied, his voice quieter than usual. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it back into his pocket throughout the call. He answered questions and discussed financial forecasts, but he was barely present. He caught himself losing track of the conversation more than once. The numbers on the screen seemed meaningless compared to the image of a little girl in a pink dress staring at the sky, asking why God let her father get sick. When the meeting ended, he sat in silence for a long while. It wasn't like him to get this distracted. Sundar was known for his focus, his ability to compartmentalize and keep emotions separate from decisions. But now his mind refused to let go of what he had seen. By evening, he decided to walk back to the park. Maybe, he told himself, she and her mother might be there again. But when he arrived, the bench was empty. The park itself was quieter, the late afternoon sunlight casting long shadows over the grass. A couple of teenagers played frisbee near the fountain, and an elderly man fed pigeons by the path. But there was no sign of Mia. He sat on the bench anyway, letting his mind wander. He thought about his own childhood in Chennai, how his parents had worked tirelessly to give him opportunities they never had. He remembered how, even when money was tight, his mother would find ways to give to others, whether it was sharing food with neighbors or offering help to someone in need. She had always told him, kindness is not what you do when it's easy. It's what you do when it costs you something. As the sun began to set, Sundar felt a quiet resolve forming inside him. He didn't know why this mattered so much to him, but he knew he couldn't ignore it. The next day, he returned to the park during his lunch break. This time, he brought a small bag with him, bottled water, some snacks, and a few coloring books and crayons. He thought that if he saw Mia again, he could offer her something, even if it was small. Hours passed. He visited the park 3 more times that week, but there was no sign of her. With each empty bench, his frustration grew. It wasn't just that he wanted to see her again. It was that he had no way of knowing if she was okay. On Friday evening, just as he was about to give up for the week, he caught sight of a familiar figure in the distance. It was her mother, the same hurried steps, the same tired face. She was carrying 2 grocery bags, struggling slightly under their weight. Sundar's heart quickened as he scanned the area, and then he saw her, Mia, walking a few steps behind, dragging her feet, her small hands gripping the straps of an old backpack. He didn't want to startle them, so he walked toward them slowly. "Hi," he said gently when he was close enough. The mother stopped and turned sharply, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Can I help you?" "My name is Sundar," he said calmly, keeping his tone respectful. "I met your daughter earlier this week." We talked for a little while at the park. He glanced at Mia, who was already smiling faintly in recognition. A woman looked him over, clearly cautious. "Why are you talking to my daughter?" "Because," Sundar said, his voice steady. "She asked me a question I haven't stopped thinking about. And I just wanted to make sure you're both doing." "Okay." The mother hesitated, her eyes flicking between him and Mia. She shifted the grocery bags in her arms and said, "We're fine. Thank you." Her tone was polite, but guarded. Sundar didn't push. Instead, he reached into his bag and took out the coloring books and snacks. "These are for you," he said, holding them out toward Mia. Mia, single quotes, S eyes lit up. But she looked at her mother for permission. After a long pause, the woman nodded slightly. Mia took the bag and whispered, "Thank you." As they turned to leave, Sundar called after them, "Mia, I still have your drawing." The girl stopped and turned, her eyes wide. "You kept it?" "Yes," he said with a small smile, "and I think maybe there's something I can do about it." The mother frowned slightly, clearly unsure what he meant. But before she could respond, a loud coughing fit from somewhere down the street made her tense. She immediately grabbed Mia's hand and hurried away without explanation. Sundar stood there, puzzled. But as they disappeared into the distance, he noticed something. The direction they were walking wasn't toward the nicer part of town. It was toward the older streets, where the buildings were worn and the sidewalks cracked. He felt a pull inside him, the kind that told him this was far from over. And as he took a slow breath, he decided he would follow that pull, no matter where it led. The following morning, Sundar woke up earlier than usual. The city outside his window was still quiet, the streets painted in the pale gray light of dawn. But even in that calm, his mind was restless. All night he had been thinking about the direction Nia and her mother had walked, toward the worn-out streets that most people from his circles rarely set foot in. He knew he couldn't just let the encounter fade away. There was a knot in his chest, a mix of curiosity, worry, and a strange sense of responsibility that had taken root since the moment he found that little drawing on the park bench. He made himself a quick breakfast, but barely touched it. By the time the sun had fully risen, he was already in his car, navigating through the city toward that part of town. As he drove, the glass towers and manicured sidewalks slowly gave way to older brick buildings, faded paint, and storefronts with weathered signs. The streets here told a different story, one of struggle, resilience, and survival. He parked a few blocks away from where he had last seen them, not wanting to draw too much attention to himself. Walking slowly, he scanned every corner, every alley, every shop window, hoping for a glimpse of Mia's pink dress or her mother's familiar tired gait. After nearly half an hour of searching, he spotted her mother outside a small corner grocery store. Speaking quietly to the owner while holding a paper bag, he approached carefully, not wanting to alarm her. "Good morning," he said softly. Looked up, startled at first, then frowned. "You again?" "I'm sorry," Sundar said, keeping his tone gentle. "I know it might seem strange, but I've been thinking about your daughter's question ever since we met. I want to help if I can." She hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "Help? Why? You don't even know us." "You're right," he admitted, "but sometimes you meet someone and you just know their story matters. I think Mia's story matters." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, with a sigh, she glanced over her shoulder and nodded toward a side street. "Walk with me." They walked in silence for a few minutes until they reached a small apartment building with peeling paint and a broken buzzer. The hallway smelled faintly of damp walls and cooking spices. She led him up 2 flights of creaking stairs to a narrow door at the end of the hall. Inside, The apartment was small but tidy. Mia sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring in one of the books he had given her, humming softly to herself. When she saw him, her eyes lit up. "You came back?" "I said I would," Sundar replied, with a warm smile. But before he could say more, a sound came from the next room, a deep, rough cough, followed by a low groan. The mother quickly excused herself and stepped into the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Sundar caught a glimpse of a man lying in bed, his face pale, his body thin beneath the blanket. Tubes connected to an oxygen tank sat beside the bed, and the faint beeping of a small monitor filled the air. When she returned, her face was tight. "That's Mia's father," she said quietly. "He was diagnosed with a rare lung disease last year. He hasn't been able to work since." Sundar's heart sank. "Is he getting treatment?" "As much as we can afford," she said, looking down. "But the medication is expensive, and the waiting list for certain procedures is long. Sometimes it feels like we're just holding on." He thought about the little girl in the park, asking why God didn't stop her father from getting sick. Now he understood the weight behind her words. "Why didn't you tell me before?" he asked gently. She shrugged, a weary bitterness in her voice. "People see families like ours and they think they already know the story. Most don't want to hear it." There was a long pause. Sundar felt a quiet resolve hardening inside him. "I want to hear it," he said firmly, "and maybe I can do more than just listen." She studied him for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. "Why?" she asked again. "Why would someone like you care about?" "Yes," he took a deep breath. "Because when I was young, there were people who cared about me when they didn't have to. It changed everything. And now, maybe it's my turn to be that person for someone else." Before she could respond, a small voice spoke up from the floor. "Does that mean God sent you?" Mia had stopped coloring and was looking at him with wide, unblinking eyes. The question caught him completely off guard. He opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, a loud crash came from the other room. Her mother rushed in, and Sundar followed. The oxygen tank had tipped over, and the man was struggling to breathe. His face was turning ashen, his hands gripping the edge of the bed. Without thinking, Sundar moved to help, lifting the tank upright and checking the tubing while the mother steadied her husband. His breaths were shallow, each one a fight. "We need to get him to the hospital," Sundar said urgently. "We can't," she replied, panic in her voice. "We don't have insurance, and the last time..." "There's no time," Sundar cut in. "I'll take care of it." Before she could protest, he was already dialing his driver and arranging for an immediate pickup. Within minutes, they were on their way, the city blurring past the car windows. Mia clung to her mother's side, her eyes never leaving her father's face. Sundar sat opposite them, his mind racing. He didn't know it yet, but the events of this night would open a door to something far bigger than just helping one family dot. And by the time that door opened, he would have to confront a truth about himself that he had been avoiding for years. Asterisk, the emergency room was a blur of movement and noise. Nurses wheeling gurneys, monitors beeping, the sharp scent of antiseptic filling the air. Sundar stayed close as Mia's father was rushed through double doors, his oxygen mask pressed tightly over his face. His breaths came in shallow gasps, each one sounding like it scraped against the inside of his lungs. Mia clung to her mother's waist. Her small hands, trembling, the admitting nurse began asking rapid questions, her pen scratching against the clipboard. Medical history? Medications? Allergies? Mia's mother answered as best she could, her voice shaking. But when the nurse got to the question about insurance, she froze. Sundar saw the panic flash in her eyes, the same panic he had seen earlier in the apartment, without a second thought. He stepped forward. "I'll cover everything," he said firmly. "Put it under my account." The nurse looked up, startled, but nodded quickly and wrote something down. Sundar knew he could handle the cost. Money wasn't the issue. What mattered now was getting him the care he needed before it was too late. As the medical team disappeared with Mia's father, the three of them were left in the waiting area. Mia leaned her head against her mother's arm, her eyes glassy with fear. Sundar sat across from them, feeling the weight of his silence between breaths. He had been in countless high-pressure situations, product launches with billions on the line, negotiations that could shift the future of entire industries. But nothing compared to the way his heart clenched watching a child silently will her father to survive. An hour passed. Then, too, the automatic doors opened and closed again and again as other families came and went. Sundar found himself replaying Mia's question from the park over and over. Do you think God is real? Here, in this place where life and death fought. Quietly in hospital rooms, the question felt heavier than ever. Finally, a doctor in green scrubs appeared. Are you the family of Mr. Rodriguez? Yes, double quotes, yes, Mia's mother said, standing quickly. Sundar stood too. He's stable for now, the doctor said. But his lungs are in very poor condition. We've started him on stronger medication, but without a specialized treatment, his condition will continue to decline. There's an experimental procedure that could help, but the doctor hesitated, glancing at Sundar. It's expensive, and the waiting list is long. Asterisk. How long? Sundar asked. Months, the doctor replied. Maybe longer. And given his current state, I'm not sure he has that long. The words hung in the air like a cold shadow. Mia's mother pressed a hand to her mouth, fighting to keep her composure. Sundar's mind was already turning, connections, resources, ways to cut through the delays. But before he could speak, a voice came from behind them. Asterisk. There might be another way. They turned to see an older man standing just inside the waiting room doors. He wore a worn leather jacket and carried a small messenger bag slung over one shoulder. His hair was streaked with gray, and his face carried lines that spoke of both wisdom and hardship. Mia's mother's eyes widened. Daniel? The man gave a small nod. I heard what happened. Someone at the clinic called me. Who is this? Sundar asked quietly. He's my brother, she said, but we haven't spoken in years. Daniel stepped forward, his gaze steady on Sundar. You're Sundar Pichai, aren't you? Sundar hesitated, not sure where this was going. Yes, then you might be able to help more than you think, Daniel said, lowering his voice. There's a research team working on a breakthrough. Treatment for exactly this kind of lung condition. It's not public yet, but I know one of the lead scientists. They need funding, and someone who can push through the bureaucratic walls. Mia's mother looked between them, confused. Why haven't you told me about this before? Daniel's jaw tightened. Because I didn't think you'd want my help, not after everything. The air between them grew tense, heavy with unspoken history. Sundar could feel it. Something had happened between them long before this night. Something that had fractured their family ties. But there was no time to unpack it now. If this treatment can help him, tell me what it will take to get him in. Sundar said. Daniel glanced at him, studying him for a moment as if trying to decide whether to trust him. It'll take more than money, he said finally. The hospital won't approve it without a personal recommendation from someone with influence. And even then, there's a risk. The treatment is experimental. It could work, or it could make things worse. Sundar didn't flinch. Then we'll take that risk. Mia tugged on her mother's sleeve, her voice small but certain. Mom, I think God sent him. The room went still. Her mother's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly looked away, as if afraid to hope too much. Daniel nodded slowly. All right, I'll make the call. But you should know, once we start this, there's no going back. And there are people who don't want this treatment getting out yet. They'll try to stop us. Those words sent a chill through the air. Sundar had dealt with resistance before. Corporate pushback, political pressure. But this was different. This was about a man's life, a child's hope, and something bigger than any boardroom fight. As Daniel stepped outside to make the call, Sundar looked at Mia and her mother. He didn't say it out loud, but he knew in his heart, whatever came next, he wouldn't walk away, because this wasn't just about answering a little girl's question anymore. This was about proving in the most real and human way possible that no one gets forgotten. And yet, in the quiet corner of his mind, a thought lingered. Who exactly doesn't want this treatment to exist? And why? Asterisk the hospital cafeteria was quiet at this hour, the low hum of a vending machine filling the silence. Sundar sat at a corner table with a paper cup of coffee cooling between his hands. He wasn't drinking it. His mind was elsewhere, replaying Daniel's words from the night before. There are people who don't want this treatment getting out. It kept echoing, gnawing at the edges of his focus. In the corporate world, he had seen plenty of competition, secrecy, and delayed innovation, but in medicine, this was a different level of cruelty. This was about holding back something that could save lives. Daniel arrived a few minutes later, slipping into the seat opposite Sundar. He placed his phone on the table and leaned forward. "I spoke to Dr. Hamilton," he said, in a low voice. "He's willing to see us, but we have to meet him off-site. He's afraid the hospital board will catch wind of it." Sundar raised an eyebrow. Afraid? Why would helping a dying man cause trouble? Daniel glanced around the empty cafeteria before answering. Because the pharmaceutical company funding the hospital's lung research division is banking on a different treatment, one that's less effective, but already deep in the approval pipeline. If Hamilton's work gets out first, it'll make their billion-dollar investment worthless. They'd rather stall his trials and let people wait, even if some don't survive. The words made Sundar's stomach turn. He had heard about greed in medicine before, but hearing it laid out so plainly in the context of a man fighting for each breath in a hospital bed down the hall made it feel personal. Where do we meet him? Sundar asked. Daniel slid a piece of paper across the table. Old research lab, warehouse district. Tonight. He's paranoid. Says he doesn't want any electronic records of the meeting, so no emails, no texts. If anyone's watching, they'll see nothing. Sundar nodded, though he could feel the weight of what this meant. Agreeing to meet like this wasn't just stepping into a complicated situation. It was stepping into one where powerful people could. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the city skyline, Sundar left the hospital. Quietly. Daniel was waiting in a beat-up sedan, the kind of car that wouldn't attract attention. They drove in silence through streets that grew emptier and darker. Until they reached the edge of the warehouse district, the lab looked abandoned. From the outside, boarded-up windows, faded paint peeling from the brick walls. But inside, the lights glowed faintly. They were met by a thin, nervous-looking man in his late 50s, with graying hair and deep lines etched into his face. "Mr. Pichai," Dr. Hamilton said, shaking his hand quickly. "I didn't think you'd actually come." "If what Daniel says is true, then we don't have time to waste," Sundar replied. "Tell me about the treatment." Hamilton led them to a small workroom cluttered with medical charts, diagrams, and test samples. He began explaining a regenerative therapy that repaired lung tissue at the cellular level, offering not just relief but actual recovery. Had already run successful trials on a handful of patients, but without official approval, he couldn't expand it. The hospital board, under pressure from the pharmaceutical company, had pulled his funding and locked away his research data. "So, it works?" Sundar asked. Hamilton hesitated, then nodded. "In the cases I've treated, yes, but it's still early. It's not without risk. And if the board finds out I've been running these trials in secret, they'll strip me of my license." Daniel leaned forward. "What would it take to get Mia's father treated?" Hamilton rubbed his temples. "Equipment, a sterile environment, and a guarantee that if something goes wrong, the hospital won't come after me. And," he looked directly at Sundar, "someone powerful enough to keep the company off my back while I do it." It was the kind of challenge Sundar was used to in business, but here the stakes weren't market shares or quarterly earnings. This was about a man's life. Still, he could already see the pushback in his mind. Investors questioning why the CEO of Google was meddling in a medical controversy. The media spinning it into a scandal. Before he could answer, there was a loud bang from somewhere in the building. All three men froze. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Daniel instinctively moved toward the door, but it swung open, Before he got there, two men in dark suits stepped inside, their expressions cold. One of them spoke in a flat, authoritative tone. "Dr. Hamilton, you've been told to cease all unauthorized activity. This is your last warning." The air in the room seemed to tighten. Sundar recognized the tactic: intimidation. He had seen it in corporate negotiations, but here it carried an edge that felt far more dangerous. "He's with me," Sundar said, evenly, standing to face them. "And if you have an issue, you can take it up with me directly." The man's eyes flicked over him, and a faint smirk crossed his face. "Careful, Pichai. You might be a big name in tech, but this isn't your world." Asterisk without another word, they turned and left, their footsteps fading into the distance. Hamilton exhaled slowly. "You see what we're dealing with? They're watching me all the time. If we do this, we have to move fast, and we have to move in secret." Sundar looked at Daniel, then back at Hamilton. "Then we'll move fast, and we'll do whatever it takes." As they left the lab that night, Sundar couldn't shake the feeling that the confrontation wasn't over. The men in suits hadn't looked surprised to see him, which meant they already knew he was involved. And if they knew, they'd be coming for him next. Asterisk the night after the warehouse meeting, Sundar barely slept. He sat in the dim light of his home office, the city, glowing faintly through the floor-to-ceiling windows. On his desk were two piles of papers, one filled with the day's business reports, contracts and memos, and the other filled with Dr. Hamilton's medical charts and treatment plans. His mind kept drifting away from the familiar numbers to the unfamiliar but urgent diagrams of damaged lung tissue and recovery projections. The risk wasn't just professional. Going against a powerful pharmaceutical company wasn't something you could quietly step away from. He knew once he pushed forward, his name, his reputation, and perhaps even his safety would be entangled in something much bigger than helping one family. But every time he thought of walking away, he saw Mia's face, her wide eyes asking if God was real, her small hands clutching the coloring books he had given her. Her hope balanced so delicately between belief and despair. By the time the first rays of dawn touched the skyline, his decision was made. He called Daniel. "Tell Hamilton we start tonight. We'll set up at the apartment. I'll get the equipment delivered in pieces so it doesn't draw attention." The day passed in a blur of phone calls, discreet arrangements, and quiet favors from people Sundar trusted. A rented van brought in boxes disguised as generic medical supplies. Two engineers from a small independent lab owed him a personal debt and agreed to calibrate Hamilton's machines on site. Everything was timed to avoid notice, each delivery arriving at staggered hours, so no one would suspect a coordinated effort by nightfall. The Rodriguez apartment no longer looked like the same cramped space he had walked into days earlier. The living room had been cleared, a sterile table and equipment set up beside the couch, oxygen monitors humming softly. Mia's father lay resting, pale but conscious, watching the activity with quiet confusion. Hamilton arrived with a black case, his hands steady despite the tension in the air. He explained the procedure one more time, how it would work, the risks, the potential for immediate improvement, and the possibility of failure. Mia sat on the floor beside her father's bed, holding his hand tightly, as if her touch alone could keep him here. Just as Hamilton began setting up the final piece of equipment, a loud knock shook the door. Everyone froze. Daniel moved to the peephole, his jaw tightening. "It's them," he whispered. The same two men from the warehouse stood outside, their suits immaculate, their faces unreadable. The knock came again, louder this time. Hamilton's hands trembled slightly. "If they shut us down now, it's over," he murmured. Sundar stepped forward, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Keep going," he told Hamilton. "Don't stop for anything." Daniel looked at him sharply. "You're going to open the door?" "I'm going to buy us time," Sundar said, walking to the entrance. He opened it just enough to step outside, closing it firmly behind him so they couldn't see it. "You're interfering in something that doesn't concern you." The taller man said flatly, "Walk away now, and this ends quietly." It concerns me, Sundar replied, his voice steady. Because a man's life is on the line. Because the little girl believes that someone will help her when no one else will. And because I don't walk away when I see injustice, no matter how. Neat the suits are on the men delivering it. The shorter man smirked. This isn't about justice. This is about business. And you, of all people, know business better than anyone. You start something here, and you'll be stepping on the wrong toes. Sundar didn't move. Then I'll step harder. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The tension was a live wire between them. Finally, the taller man leaned in, slightly. You have no idea what you're risking. No, Sundar said quietly. You have no idea what you're losing? The moment the world finds out you put profits over saving lives. The men exchanged a glance, their faces tightening. Without another word, they turned and walked away, their footsteps fading into the dark hallway. Sundar waited until he was sure they were gone before stepping back inside. Hamilton was already in the middle of the procedure. A faint rhythmic pulse came from the machine, the therapy being delivered directly to the damaged lung tissue. The air in the room was tense, everyone silently willing it to work. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Then something changed. The labored rise and fall of Mia's father's chest began to ease. The harsh rasp in his breath softened. His eyes, which had been half closed, opened wider. I can breathe, he whispered, almost in disbelief. Mia gasped and threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. Her mother covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. Daniel looked away, blinking hard. Hamilton checked the monitors, his own eyes widening. It's working, he said, his voice breaking just slightly. His oxygen levels are climbing. Sundar felt the weight in his chest finally ease. He looked at Mia, who was now smiling through her tears. She turned to him, her voice small but sure. So, God is real? He knelt down beside her, choosing his words carefully. Maybe God works in ways we can't always see. Maybe he works through people. And maybe sometimes he gives us the chance to be the answer to someone else's prayer. She thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Hugging him tightly. Over the next hour, Hamilton monitored the progress, making small adjustments. The improvement held. It wasn't a miracle cure. There would be follow-up treatments and a long road ahead. But it was a chance, and sometimes a chance was everything. As Sundar prepared to leave, Daniel walked him to the door. You know they'll come after you for this, he said quietly. Sundar glanced back at Mia, still sitting beside her father. Let them, he replied. Some fights are worth it. Outside, the night air felt different. Lighter, sharper, alive with the quiet hum of the city. Sundar knew this wasn't the end of the battle, but it was a victory, and more importantly, it was proof, not just to Mia, but to himself, that sometimes the right thing to do was the thing that cost you the most. And as he walked away from that old apartment building, the drawing she had left on the park bench all those days ago was still in his pocket. Now, it felt less like a plea and more like a promise fulfilled.